Hey guys, Chris from Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're going to be replacing the factory radio on this 2007 Toyota 4Runner. Now in this install we're going to show you how to remove this factory radio. We'll head over to the bench, show you the parts that we're going to need, including the radio, dash kit, and wiring harness. We'll come back here to get everything reinstalled. Let's get started. First thing we need to do is get this radio on out. Always a great idea to make sure your discs are removed, because once the radio's out, it's almost impossible to get them out later on. There's actually quite a bit in terms of disassembly we need to do today in order to get access to this radio. The first thing that we need to do is remove our center console area. We do have to pop down the knee buster temporarily to get a screw. Then the outer trim bezel can come out of the way, which allows us to actually get to the radio itself. So go ahead and open up your center console here. What we're going to do is use our hands, just kind of grab the sides here, and we're going to give this a little tug up. We have a little panel tool to help pop these panels up a little bit better. And you're going to disconnect your harnesses here. Okay, once those harnesses have been disconnected, next thing that we'll need to do is still, with our hands here, we're going to grab the outer pockets here, the outer silver trim bezel. We're going to just kind of give that a tug up as well. That's going to come up and out of the way. Again, just held in with clips. Now, really removing that gives us access to get the main dash bezel up and out of the way. Before we do that, let's pop open our little pocket here. You may have a screw, depending if your radio's been out or not. Our screw is missing, but it's usually a 10 millimeter. Since ours is gone, we don't have to remove it. We're going to pop out our heating and air controls here. Let's unsnap those. Now, one quick note. See our airbag light here? Our airbag will trip a false code or light on the dash if we disconnect this panel and turn on the key. So while this panel is disconnected, do not put the key in the ignition. It's always also a good idea, if you're worried about that, just go ahead and remove the negative off the battery. There's usually a trim ring that's up around your key. Ours is missing. Again, it looks like this radio's been out at one point, but you'd pop that little key ring off. That's just held in with clips. Next thing we need to do is there's going to be a couple of screws. There's two 10 millimeters that we need to remove that are usually the black ones here. And then this will pop down to give us access to removing the screw out of the bezel itself. Before we start working on that, let's go ahead and remove our little pocket here. Ours just lifts on out. It may have a little bit more tension there, just kind of depending on the condition of that pocket. The little clips are holding it in. Once that's out of the way, we can finally now begin pulling this bezel out. There's going to be the two 10 millimeter bolts here in front of the radio that both hold in the bezel as well as the radio. Move these two 10s. Okay, once those two 10s are removed, go ahead and give your bezel a good tug. Okay, and you're going to have a couple of harnesses to disconnect here. Disconnect your hazard switch, your rear window control, and your four-wheel drive. Radio is going to have two 10 millimeters here in the back. All right, with those screws now removed, go ahead and pull the radio on out. You're going to have a few harnesses to disconnect. Just press in the tab and pull the connector. It should pop on out. And then you're going to have your antennas. Go ahead and remove those. Okay, there we are. So, with the radio now removed, we can head over to the bench to show you the parts that we're going to need for our install. Alright, so here at the bench, the parts that we're going to need to replace our factory radio. First and foremost is the radio that the customer wants us to put in. This one's pretty cool. It's a Sony 8-inch float mount screen. It's the XAV AX8050D. And what's special about this is not only is it a float mount screen, but it's a big oversized 8-inch, and it actually features a single-din chassis. So it's pretty versatile where it can be mounted. The kit itself comes with the screen, a bunch of accessories, the actual radio itself right here, a mounting din, everything like that. Now, to accommodate that in the factory location, and depending on the radio you're installing at home, there's a couple of install parts needed. Now, your wiring kits needed are going to vary between a couple of different versions depending on the features that you have. If you do not have any sort of steering wheel volume controls, you don't have the factory aux, just the basic base version of your 4Runner, all you need is the Metra 70-1761 harness adapter. It's one that Tony has been using forever. If you have steering wheel volume controls, you can still use that, but you'll need additional parts. Or you can use an all-in-one crux harness like we're using today. Either if you have the non-JBL version, we don't have JBL in our install today, but we do have steering wheel volume controls. We're going to use the Crux SWRTY-61S, retains your factory aux, steering wheel volume controls, and has the harnesses needed to integrate your new aftermarket radio. If you have JBL, and the easiest way to know is looking on your door panels, if you have the JBL Synthesis logo, or the factory sub in the back, you're going to need the Crux SWRTY-61J that retains that JBL. As for dash kits, there's going to be a single DIN and a double DIN version. Single DIN is the Metra 99-8206. This essentially allows us to install a single DIN in the factory location. If you're doing a native double DIN with the screen actually mounted in the dash, not a float mount like us, the standard double DIN dash is the Metra 95-8202. We don't need this 95-8202 just because our chassis of a radio happens to be a single DIN, so we need the single DIN kit today. Finally here, we like to use these USB adapters. They actually look like a factory Toyota blank that has a USB flush mounted in it, and we're going to be putting this in the center console for easy access for CarPlay and Android Auto on our aftermarket radio. So that's the parts that we need to use here today. First thing we need to do is grab our harness from our radio. We're going to grab the harness out of our Crux box. Today we're going to be soldering. We need to build our harness so our radio can plug into the factory vehicle, and then we'll turn our attention to preparing the dash kit. Alright, so what we've done here is we pulled our Crux harness out of the box, and we've prepped our radio harness, and we've stripped both ends here, and what we're going to be doing is matching color for color. Now, you can't always assume it's going to be a perfect color match. You want to ensure that you match the function of the harness adapter to the function of the radio, so it's always a good idea to double check what those functions are before you just assume the color is the same. Now, we've loaded our wires up with some heat shrink. Today we're going to be soldering. Now, if you don't know how to solder, you can use butt connectors, or even better, crimp caps to make your connections. Just don't twist and tape or use wire nuts, as they're just not designed for an automotive application. So what we're going to do is start connecting our colors. We're going to be soldering here today. Once those connections cool, we'll shrink them down with a heat gun. Alright, so we went ahead and finished soldering up our harness here. In our case, all our speaker wires here, everything was color for color. And turn on wire, we actually added an extra little lead off in case we had an aftermarket amplifier down the road, so that's all there. Our parking brake, Sony's, so you can still ground your parking brake right to the ground here, so we combined that in there and then added an extra ground in case we had an accessory that needs a ground. Pioneers and Alpines, you can't just ground the parking brake, you'll need a bypass, and you can check out our videos on that. Illumination is the same, constant 12 volts yellow is the same, and then our red here, we actually combined in. Our radio doesn't have a power antenna output, so we just combined it into our accessory, the solid blue. And then we also added another red wire off here, an extra red wire. We just combined it in. So down the road when we do a backup camera, if we want to power the backup camera at the harness, we have an accessory wire ready to go. So there is our harness, all good to go. We're going to move our heat shrink up and over those raw connections and shrink them down with a heat gun. Alright, so with those all completed here, next we need to turn our attention to our smart module for steering wheel volume controls. It does plug into this harness here. What we need to do though is first set our dip switches, so we're going to turn our attention over to our manual here. It identifies how to set those dip switches. We need to find the radio here in the list and then associate those dip switches to the actual module itself. So looking here, this is dip switch 1 through 4. So the first set is going to identify which radio that we're putting in. We're doing a new Sony So we're going to do off, off, on, off configuration here. So we're going to mirror that there. And then the second set of dip switches are based on the vehicle. Since this is obviously a Toyota, there's only one option here, and that has to be off, on. So we're going to use this first set and then this second set and mirror that on our module here. All right, so we set our dip switches there. You see we have the off, off, on, off, as we talked about for the new Sony. And then the second set is off, on, as indicated as a Toyota. So this is done. We can go ahead and plug this on in here. Now the second harness we haven't talked about is your steering wheel control harness. This end will plug in to this other side here. And these connections will plug into your radio. Now if you have a 3.5mm WR wired remote input for steering wheel controls like we do on the back of the radio, that just simply plugs in. If you have a Kenwood or JVC, you'll use this end and connect into the blue yellow wire of your Kenwood JVC. If you don't have either one of those, you don't have the input here or one wire there, you cut this harness off, you'll strip the ends and wire it to key 1 and key 2. So finally here, what we need to do is we're going to prepare our harness, we're going to wrap it in some high temp electrical acetate, and then turn our attention over to our dash. All right, so we went ahead and finished prepping our harness here. This then plugs in the vehicle, that plugs into the radio. We have our WR input, our steering wheel control remote input for our radio there. We don't have an aux on the back of the radio. This harness retains the factory aux in the center console, but this radio isn't compatible with an aux anymore. It's kind of a thing of the past now, and so we just capped that and zip tied that off. And we got our dip switches all set up with our module and got that all connected as well. So we're done here, besides hooking this up, but again, that'll be covered in a separate video, along with our extra accessory wire to power our backup camera. Let's go ahead and set this guy off to the side and turn our attention over to our dash kit. Alright, so we went ahead and got our radio mounted up into the kit itself, chose the specific side brackets, and with the single DIN, they actually include the mounting brackets and everything, but if you do the double DIN, you do need the factory metal brackets on the radio itself. So in this case, we don't need the factory metal ones. Instead, we're going to use the ones supplied by it. That's really it that we need to do with our dash kit. Everything's all assembled. We use the metal can supplied by the radio. At this point of time, with our radio and our harness done, we can head back to the car to start getting everything installed. One quick thing here, the additional step in case you have blanks here. Sometimes you may have the heated seats on the side. If you have a blank here, what you can do is just push these on up from the inside. And these USB adapters that we showed earlier actually will literally plug in its place, just like so. Just like that. And we'll use the USB extension cable supplied by our radio to make this connection up to the radio. So since most USBs nowadays on aftermarket radios are located on the rear of the unit, this is a kind of nice factory looking feature to relocate that USB to a more convenient location. Alright, so we're back here in the 4Runner. We're ready to start getting our radio reinstalled. So we're going to grab our harness adapter. And because, again, we have the right harness adapter, non-JBL, our harnesses are going to match up perfectly. So we've got 1, we've got 2, and we've got 3. Now, our antenna adapter doesn't require a harness adapter. It does have 2 prongs here for the Motorola antenna input. We have our standard FM as well as the additional antenna here for better reception. Most instances, you don't need the smaller one. You just need this bigger one. But there are adapters out there that can combine these two to a single Motorola male style input, and we can link one of those into the description in case you want one of those. Most instances, this secondary one is not needed. We ran our Bluetooth mic. We put it up on the 8-pillar. Ran it up underneath since this was all down. And we actually did a backup camera, which we'll link in a separate video in the description. So, with those connections now made, before we put the radio in, we're going to run our USB harness down to the center console. All right, so we got the center console all back in. We got our USB socket all reinstalled as well. Everything's looking great. It just took us a little bit of time to get that screen mounted here following Sony's instructions. But in the end, look at that fitment. That actually looks super good for an 8-inch. Doesn't seem to block the vents at all, and fits really well in that location. We left a little bit of space so it's not rubbing on our heating and air controls. And so our USB here is great. All nice and hooked up. Makes it really nice for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto access. Steering wheel volume controls seem to be working great. We'll hit volume up, volume down there, track up, track down, and even source. If you want to see more on this install, we actually did a backup camera here, which is pretty cool. If you want to see that video, we'll link that video down in the description of this one. Also, if you want to use any of the parts that we did in our video here today, we'll link them down in the description of the video. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to hit the like button if you like what you saw, and don't forget to subscribe and post great content on the channel all the time, and we will see you in the next video.